You're listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. This is the show that talks about identity and access management and making sure you know who has access to what. Let's get started. Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff. How's it going?
Not so bad. Yourself?
Good. I was listening to our show the other day for the first time in a while. I mean, I don't listen to every episode, right? I'm on every episode, but I don't like to listen to my own voice. I think a lot of people have that aversion. And I've got to say, Jeff, and so for everyone who's listening on a regular basis, they should know that you are the man behind the scenes who does all the editing work and everything and all the funky music in the beginning. And that's what really got me. I was like, whoa, we're like totally pro here.
I was wondering if you're going to notice that. I kind of slipped that change in earlier this year. I figured, new year, let's maybe try something a little bit different. But I don't listen to our shows. Even when I'm editing them, I'm listening to them, but I'm not really listening to them. I'm looking for like background noise and like clicks and trying to, make sure that it sounds as good as I can in my, totally amateur and I'm sure totally unprofessional way that I edit this show. So it is totally, I've learned a lot over 80 plus episodes at this point, but I appreciate that. So it's, it's cool. It's a passion project, I think, between the two of us.
Right.
Just kind of started and, here we are several months and dozens of episodes later.
Well, the other day I said to somebody, we were on a call together, and I said, yeah, this is my favorite part of the job. And you reminded me it's not really part of the job.
Yeah, it would be cool. Yeah, it's definitely, we do have day jobs. We don't really talk about it too much, but yeah, we do, IAM strategy and assessments and things like that. But yeah, we don't do sponsors either. So it's going to be kind of hard to turn this into, a paying gig without sponsorship, I guess. And I don't know if that's where I want to go with it.
We're still waiting for that call from Spotify, that $1 million check.
Right. Well, I guess if you're interested in sponsoring, right, feel free to get in touch if it makes sense. As long as we can keep it, relatively vendor neutral, I'm pretty open to anything at this point.
I agree. What's really been great, though, has been the feedback from our listeners, and somebody that we're having on today is a listener of the show and we've been in contact with, and he's somebody who puts out a lot of content himself. So Jeff, I'll pass it back to you to do the introduction, but I think it's really cool that, our listeners are reaching out and there are people who are active IAM practitioners as well.
Yeah, it is super cool. And, super pumped to actually have Carlos on the show. We'll get to him in a second here. He wrote an article that touched around, how to build a successful IAM program. And it was on enterprisesecuritymag.com. I'll have a link to the article in our show notes. You can kind of check that out. And part of that article touched on managing organizational change, which I thought was interesting and is something that sometimes gets overlooked, right, when we're developing programs and kind of getting things out and then into the real world. So without further ado, why don't we bring on the author of that article? His name is Carlos Rodriguez. He's the Director of IT Security and Risk at Citizens Property Insurance. Welcome, Carlos.
Thank you, Jim and Jeff. Happy to be here. And I will start with not only thanking you for the opportunity, but for the content that you put out every day or every week. Been listening for about a year. So I appreciate it on behalf of our community.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I feel like this deserves like a, long-time listener, first-time caller, if you like exactly. the radio tropes. But that's really cool. And excited to have you here because I really want to get into that whole topic of the change management. But if you've been listening, right, you probably know the first question, which is, how did you get into the IAM space or the InfoSec area? Is it something that chose you or did you choose it?
I think we chose each other. Honestly, I grew up on the help desk rank like many, and part of that usually involved provisioning and deprovisioning user, from a execution point of view, and building a few processes. But from there, I got engaged with third-party access or remote access from a security point of view, from firewalls and what have you, concentrators. Then kept growing into more of leadership roles, driving strategies for access as a whole in different organizations. My passion has always been in security, and I discovered a few years ago that access was key to have sound security for any organization.
So, Carlos, we've referenced this blog already, and the focus on it was organizational or managing organizational change. Right, it's such a big part of anytime you roll out IAM technology projects, new processes. The amount of impact they have on people and managing that impact is really key to the success of your initiative. So tell us about the blog. Tell us about what your perspective is on change management.
Sure. So identity and access management is a broad topic. It's a program. It's not a one-off. We're going to put MFA here and be done, or single sign-on. It's a big business initiative, and that's how I approach it. And because of who we are, we needed to have a stakeholder support all the way to the board of governors, of citizens. And you also have to realize, and I'm sure you all understand this, but you are changing the way people work and interact with data and systems. So usually it's very disruptive, right? And that's where organizational change management can help you to navigate the long journey, because that's the other point. This is a long journey. You're probably working on this piece this year, but next year you're going to jump on a different project and so on, and they all tie into each other. So there are different techniques for organizational change management that can help you navigate the journey and get the support from its stakeholders.
I've always kind of felt that IAM is maybe only second to an ERP initiative in terms of how much it impacts and how much it touches the business. But in a way, I prioritize IAM because it's usually the first place that people have an impact with the organization. So if you are a customer, it's obvious, right? There's that whole registration and getting logged in and things like that. But even on the enterprise side, your first activity is usually onboarding to the organization. And can you access all these systems, and even more so with everybody working remotely now? But it's just that level of touch, right? It's such an impact on everybody, and it's that first impact that they feel.
That is correct. And then you have you talk about onboarding, then you have to take those accounts down at some point in time, or change their access as people move through the organization. So it is an ongoing process from the first day, your first day, to your last day. We got to manage these identities.
When you're managing change for the organization, right, no matter what it is, I would imagine that this is not a one and done type of situation, right? It's something that's going to evolve, and you're going to identify areas that you want to improve on, just like anything else, right? Things that maybe got missed the first pass. Okay, let's remember that for next time. How do you approach that type of situation where, getting it stood up and then getting it ready to go?
Sure. So what we did was we brought in stakeholders from the entire organization, from all business units, and basically interview them. What are your strong points? What are your pain points? And based on that, we build a holistic a strategy that then we presented to them, and for feedback, part of the Agile side of the house. But there are different techniques for getting started. I was blessed to have an internal organizational change management team. And as soon as I started and found that out, I went to them, said, okay, this is a multi-year, very impactful initiative. Can you help me? And they brought in some techniques and presented to me, and what they usually lead with, and the preferred technique here for us is known as ADKAR. That's ADKIKAR, and it stands for the awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. What does that mean? Well, first, you have to be aware that a change is needed. That's your awareness, right? And that's where communication starts to drive that desire for that change. And that's the most difficult part, right? You're changing someone's way of working, and that has an impact. Then you focus on that knowledge, training, how is the change gonna impact me, and what have you. Again, the training leads to acquiring the abilities that you need to have to support and sustain the change. And then the reinforcement is ongoing. You probably have heard a lot that we've seen a lot of technology projects everywhere that where we never capitalize on the promised land, right? Because there is another priority or whatever reason. Sometimes we don't finish our projects, and that's a reinforcement piece, and also measurement of the change.
So it sounds like your organization takes change management very seriously. You talked a little bit about you had these internal stakeholders that you worked with. Talk to us a little bit more about that. Was that like I mean, I'm not sure if at your organization that's kind of formally established or you kind of reached into the organization to find people. I would think that it's kind of more common that you're really going to need to identify who are the people that can assist you in this area. But maybe talk a little bit about what your approach was in terms of identifying the people that could help you. I would imagine as a new person in the organization, right, you need some kind of mentoring of how is this done successfully in the past, but then also you have to have people who have influence within the organization and the groups that you're trying to reach out to.
Correct. So you touched on a few items that I did go by. One, I look up to my sponsors, right? Who were the sponsors of the project? In this case, the two VPs in IT. One is my boss who handles the strategy, architecture, resiliency, and security. The other one was the technology VP. And within those groups, and the first thing was understand, okay, what is the business process here? Let me follow the money, if you will, right? That's what CISOs always go by. What are the key processes in the organization? I partner closely with our enterprise architecture team, who is a sister organization, and the resiliency team, also a sister organization. We're all on the same leadership. On the resiliency side, that was key because they had conducted business impact analysis already. So I just went there, look at it, okay, and then from there, I went to the process owners of those critical processes. We just as a little bit of background, because I didn't mention this earlier, Citizens is the insurance provider of last resort in the state of Florida. That means we provide coverage for those who cannot get it in a commercial from a commercial carrier. Well, that means that a big part of our mission as a company and one of our values is that of service. We have to be there for the policyholders when a storm hits. We actually have to be on ground zero 48 hours after that of the event. So one of the key processes for us is boarding the independent adjusters that go assess the damage of the storms, right? And that's one team I went to. We don't have a sales force internally. Pretty much we work a lot with brokers and agents, right? That's another key stakeholders. Then we have policyholders, and then our internal users. Through all of these business impact analysis and my partnership with enterprise architecture, I identified those key stakeholders and then brought them in for the conversations.
What happens if you're talking with the stakeholders and you get a real stick in the mud? Someone who might be difficult. Have you encountered that? And if so, is that something, what are some of the tips or tricks you might have for the folks who are listening when that will happen? Not if, when.
Right. So, well, first understand that change is a long process, right? Studies have shown that organizational change really sticks after 3 years, give or take. So there is a concept known as a change curve, which visualize how this process goes, right? So you're at status quo for a while, right? Everything is going well, and then there's change. You introduce a change, right? At that point in time, what happens is exactly what you described, Jeff. Is denial. Why are you doing this to me? In fact, why? I also usually people also take a self denial type of deal. Why am I not taking on this and that type of deal? So then that set of quos start going down, right, on the curve. Then there is a little bit of a valley at the bottom, and that is when there's doubt and confusion and uncertainty. That's where I'm looking for what's in it for me. That's a big piece of the change process. Is we're all looking on what's in it for me, and that's me as a leader. That's what I need to communicate, because what you want to do is on that valley, you want to get out of that valley as soon as possible. You don't want to stay there long. And one of the books of my favorite books is called Peaks and Valley. Actually, there's a key question that they ask there in this situation, which is, what's the truth in this situation? And so I help people understand that. If as much as I can, I partner with at that point with my sponsors and other people that had more time in the organization to understand the other side, because I was dealing with people I didn't know for the most part. So before each conversation, I will prepare with longer tenure people in the team to understand, okay, I'm going to have the conversation with this stakeholder. Tell me who he is, what's going on with this person, what is he looking for, or she is looking for. So then once you start coming out of the valley, you start going up to rationalize, to actually accept the change. And then you get to the reinforcement part of it. So in short, I think I wanted to explain that process, but really you have to communicate what's in it for the person or for the business unit. Help them understand that, and part of what I do also is help them understand, uncover, and manage risk so they can make better decisions. Usually that works well.
You mentioned using established relationships, and I'm curious to your thought on this. Is I've been involved in organizations where I've been there for a while, and okay, let's start an IAM program, and I've also worked with organizations where it didn't exist, and I was brought in to create that IAM program and didn't have the luxury of knowing anybody really, right? I'm this new person coming into the org, and have to stand up an effective IAM program without the benefit of any relationships. I see good and bad in that, because you're also not carrying baggage potentially from previous projects or previous expectations, those sorts of things. What is your thought around, do you think one is easier than the other? Are they about the same? What would you do if you were kind of dropped into and you had a choice? Would you go into a new org, or would you try to start it up, with the current org?
Well, the way I would approach that is you are working with someone internally, right? I mean, you are a consultant coming in your case, and you're working with someone in the team, in the internal organization. That will be me. My role, my responsibility is to present those people to you so you can have those conversations. And that's what we did. That we worked with a third party consultant here, and that was my role. I was a coach, a quarterback. Let's bring claims, let's bring vendor management, let's bring legal, and I will brief the team, the consulting team. We're bringing these folks. We will give them a little bit of background, and then we really let the business guide the conversation. Tell me about your process. What matters to you? Because at the end of the day, as I mentioned earlier, this is a business initiative. This is not a technology project. And that's how we gain support from the board and everyone. And so you make them feel like we're listening to them, right? And, all the techniques around listening and reinforcement. And then when you present the results back, make sure they get feedback again. go through another iteration, and usually, they felt they were part of it. This is not IT or security working on a silo and telling us what to do. They actually are considering my input, and there's a lot of value to that.
That's right. So, Jeff, I've got a new analogy that Carlos just gave me, which is that what makes a good IAM program manager is he or she is a quarterback, right? They just they make everybody else look like the star. But Carlos, as you were kind of going through the peaks and valleys of change management, I couldn't help but draw the analogy to the 7 steps of grief.
Yeah, very, very common. Very
denial, no, this can't be happening to me. But what was coming to mind as you're talking about that is, you're helping people accept this change. You talked a little bit earlier about the trainings that you wind up doing and things like that. And I think that, what came to mind, or what I was wondering was, what are like the forms of communication? How are you getting this out there? Are you, leveraging corporate email newsletters? Are you sending letter from the desk of the CEO? What were some of the techniques that you used to kind of communicate change to the organization?
Yes, all of the above. I mean, so we have different ways to communicate because people are busy. So, we got to put the information out as much as we can. Obviously, there are certain very formal channels to communicate with the board and the executive team. We use those forums for that. I offer, and it was accepted, to the executive team to come talk to their leadership teams. And remember, boards, executive, these are 10 minutes conversation, right? 15 minutes, very short, to the point, and what's in it for me. So when I went to talk to claims, I modified my message to talk about the claims process and how this impacts that. When I went to talk to HR, I talk about, IGA and how the, HR system plays into provision and deprovisioning potentially, right? Because I knew that was a change that will impact them, and so on and so forth. That's at the business and high stakeholders level. Then we also wrote internal articles that came from our COO, who is my line of leadership. She is my boss's boss, so she put articles out there. My boss put articles. My department, my team put articles. We also did, and then you continue to adjust based on the project you're working on, right? So MFA, when we roll MFA out, we put a lot of a series that we call Tech Talks. It's an open mic conference call, and with the technology people in there to answer questions, really brief 10 minutes overview, and then it's a Q&A. And those were a hit with the organization. We had somewhere between 5 and 10 with maybe 60 people average attending. That's that. We also have another venue, which is our Agile, all of our Agile ceremonies. One of them, for example, is inspect and adapt. Well, that's when we go and show people what we're doing and they give us feedback, because it's all about feedback. That's what we try to do. We collaborate a lot. We provide information, get feedback, make adjustments. So a lot of different ways to communicate, but it's about reinforcing the message.
Well, I'm glad that you gave me that transition, right? We have enough time to kind of pick on another topic. And so in another one of your blog articles, you talked about Agile methodologies in IAM deployments. My question bluntly is, do you find that Agile works better than traditional waterfall approaches when it comes to IAM?
I think really, I don't know. I know this is not the answer that we all like, but it depends on who you are. It depends on your organization. For us, we are still growing into the Agile transformation. We've been on the journey for about 3 to 4 years, which sounds like a long time. But for a transformation of that magnitude is actually early. So for us, we approach it with an agile mentality, but sometimes we may apply waterfall techniques depending on the magnitude of the project. For example, privilege access, we did a lot of waterfall there early on as we transitioned to being deployed and then agile after that. But for the most part, we work in sprints, 2 weeks of sprints where we try to release some sort of value to the organization. But while you get the infrastructure in place, it's more of a waterfall. So it's kind of a scrum fall for us in some cases.
A scrum fall, I like that. So it sounds like there really is a place for a hybrid approach where you're not strictly agile, you're not strictly waterfall, but you take the right approach for whatever project or maybe even team, right, that you're engaging with. Have you found any particular mix that works really well, or is it truly figuring it out as you're kind of going through it with different personalities? It could be a project personality, or it could be a team personality, that sort of approach.
There's a misconception or misunderstanding about agile, and that I found that with my team. It's deploy fast. Well, it's not that really. It really has nothing to do or little to do with the speed. It has more to do really with delivering value. So with that said, our approach is in our security team and many of the IT organizations here, it's about releasing and getting feedback, right? Was this what you were looking for? Is this what you're looking for? So it's a constant engagement with the stakeholders, with the product owners, to make sure that we're delivering the value they are looking for. And because the other thing is there's a lot of competing priorities in any organization, as you know. And so you got to make sure that you are delivering value. If not, they're either going to not care much about what you're doing or shut down the project. So feedback is the key for that. We lean more towards agile to 2 weeks a sprint in our case.
How do you defend the quality when it comes to moving with speed? Because I think that's typically one of the areas that a lot of organizations and project teams struggle with, is when you get into these heads down sprints and you're kind of running full speed. How do you make sure you don't run through a wall instead of maybe making sure that you ran through the door that was already there and you're not causing more havoc than you're creating solutions to?
We from a security point of view, what we do is we try to provide the requirements as early on the Kanban portfolio Kanban as possible. There are different stages. So once the project is about to take off, we have a pretty solid SDLC checklist, and that's where we inject our IT security assessment tools that lists. So it does a lean risk analysis with what we know at that time, right? And it gives you an inherent risk that drives your controls. And we look at, okay, well, based on what you're telling me, we need these controls, and that give you a residual risk. So that was very well accepted. Was another change that was like, why are you doing this to me? Why do I have to now go through these things? But once people saw the value that we basically are not even in the conversations sometimes, because now what we're doing is the enterprise architecture team is running with that tool. And in the future, we envision we're kicking off our security champions program here very soon. We did last year, but the world changed last year. So we had to talk about Agile. We have to pivot and focus on other things. So we're about to resume that. And hopefully our security champions can take ownership of that. And the advantage is that they are part of the business units. And, we'll be more of security coaches. And they love that we basically provide the guidance, vision, requirements, and get out of the way.
And that's actually what the follow-up question I was thinking of is, does this kind of change the role of the CISO in project delivery, especially when it comes to security projects. I hear you saying yes. I don't know if you're saying that because that's kind of the changing mindset that you have in terms of what that role ought to be, or if it has anything to do with the agile versus waterfall. What do you think of that?
I think the main role of the CISO in any organization is to build and manage relationships and then provide a vision, provide guidance on risk management. And so our mission statement, I'm going to paraphrase it because we just redid it, but it's basically we're here to provide data and educate the business on risk so they make decisions. Security doesn't own risk. We manage it for the organization. We tell them here's the risk, here are alternatives to handling. And then usually from an IT point of view, especially in other business units, they come to us and say, okay, how can we remediate this? Is it possible to remediate? And sometimes it isn't. That's one thing. The other thing that I try to do is promote experimentation because that's part of Agile. That's part of who we are. And I had a conversation this morning. Hey, why are we changing this? The initial guidance that we provided to the team. This was a conversation amongst the product owners for IAM or project owners. I'm like, well, we're not saying we're changing direction. Let me ask you this. Should we listen to what they have to say to see if there is any value and we should pursue that route? And the answer was, yes, we should listen to them. I'm like, well, let's do that. Run a small experiment. If it makes sense, we keep going. If not, we just say no. And some people would say, well, you're wasting time. But really what we're doing is we're learning. So that's the role of the CISO to me, is to manage relationship, encourage innovation and experimentation, obviously help the team manage risk.
It reminds me a lot of a piece of relationship advice that I once heard, and I wish I knew who it was so I could probably give them credit. But it's not me versus you; it's us against the problem, right? And if you can bring in other parts of the organization and have them have a seat at the table and say, okay, well, here's what we're trying to solve for, right? Here's what we think. What do you think? Usually, multiple heads are better than one when it comes to that sort of situation, and empowering the organization to make those decisions and those changes and to own things, I think, is a very important part of that too. So I totally agree with that. What are some of the, we're starting to come towards the end of our time here, but I wanted to understand, from your perspective, what are some of the things that you use to stay sharp, right? I mean, we've been in the space for a while, and sometimes there are multiple outlets of information, especially, in the age that we live in with, the internet. It's no longer the security magazine that gets delivered to the office so much, every week, it seems. What are some of the things that you use to try to not only stay sharp, but to really kind of understand the perspectives of some of the stakeholders maybe that you're talking with?
Yeah, well, listening to podcasts like this is one. This one in particular, for anything identity, I stay up with, keep up with. Then I have a number of podcasts that I listen to from not only on security but leadership. I recently started listening to a couple on entrepreneurship because that helps me a lot to jump into these endeavors. But books, I really enjoyed the books from Marion Hopner on identity, attack vectors, privilege attack vectors. Those are really great books on this area. Books on leadership. Also, B-Sides Conference, I am a big fan of those. It's very relaxed practitioners. I favor those now more than the big ones where you don't really get to talk to peers. And that's the last one is peers, people like you that I can have a conversation with about anything, because at the end of the day, someone has seen the issues that I have seen. And the last thing I do, and that has helped me develop a lot, is I actually stay up with what my boss and his boss are reading. And I've been doing this even before I got to Citizens for a while. When I went into meetings in their offices, president, CEO, COO, CIO, any chief, I will look at their shelves and just pick on it and see what they have been reading. And I went and got that book. And because that helps me understand where they're coming from, what they're thinking about. It's been very helpful to me.
I think that's a really great tip for folks that are out there, is to be able to understand the perspective that, the folks who are in positions, above from a leadership perspective, is to understand what is their point of view, because I think it's an opportunity to, reinforce what they're hearing or counter what they might be hearing from an information standpoint, especially, if there's something that maybe is counter to what you're trying to get done. So, I picture this back in the old days, right? Is sneaking to an office and like peering through books and magazines on the desk and things like that to try and get, intelligence on what people are looking at, so you can kind of better understand the psychology of why they are the way they are.
Right.
Well, that's very cool. We're going to have links to the different articles that you've published out there on our show notes. Before we get things wrapped up for this show, any final words of wisdom, Carlos, that you can kind of throw out there into IAM land for the people who are listening?
Well, from an strategic point of view, if you are building the strategy or reshaping it or what have you, remember it's a business initiative, it's a business problem. And in order to solve it, you need the business stakeholders to help you. Let them guide that strategy, and you will get support. Since I've been here, because I took that approach, I have yet to find pushback from the business.
I like that. How about Jim, yourself? Anything you want to close out with before we let these fine folks go?
I'm just so appreciative of Carlos being on the show and sharing his wisdom and his experience. It kind of reinforces to me that we do have a listener base out there, and that the folks who are listening are like us, right? Constantly thinking about how to, make the business more secure, how to make the user experience better. And, per the topic we discussed today, how to make it so that, the change that we're inflicting on the organization is accepted as well as possible, right? These are hard things. Change is hard to implement, change is hard to be on the receiving end of. But it just, having Carlos on today reminds me that, our listener base out there is so strong, and really love interacting with all of you who listen on a regular basis. And please reach out and connect to Jeff and I on LinkedIn. I'm sure Carlos is open to that as well. He's very prolific in terms of publishing articles and sharing information on his feed. So please feel completely welcome to reach out and connect to all three of us.
Yeah, that's a good point. I do think the IAM field is very welcoming. It is not a very competitive field, at least I feel, if you're in the trenches, right? We're all trying to solve similar problems, maybe not exactly the same, but there are, communities of people out there that are struggling with the same problems that you might be facing on a daily basis. And, if it's been solved elsewhere, there is no shame in taking what's been learned and applying that to the problems that you've already seen. You may have to tweak it, massage it, whatever it may be, but I think that's a great thing. And one of the things I like most about the IAM, industry itself is everyone is very welcoming. And totally echo what Jim said about connecting with any of us. We're always happy to have a conversation, and this podcast is proof, right? So, let's keep the conversation going. If there's, things that you want to talk about, reach out. Let's get it on the table and have that discussion. So, totally appreciate, Carlos. Thank you so much, not only for listening, but for being part of the show as well, and bringing your experience, your knowledge to the table for folks to derive benefit from. With that, we're going to go ahead and call it for this week. You can hit us on the web at identityatthecenter.com. We're on Twitter at IDAC Podcast. There's going to be show notes that have the links to both of Carlos's writings and links also to connect to any three of us from LinkedIn as well. So with that, we'll go ahead and close it out for this week. And thanks everyone for listening, and we'll talk with you all in the next one.
Thanks for listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. If you like what you heard, don't forget to subscribe and visit us on the web at identityatthecenter.com.